Welcome to the party, pals. I'm Phil Gawthorne, action movie screenwriter.
And I'm Liam Billingham, movie podcaster.
Together, we host Die Hard on a Blank, a podcast from Sugar 23 that explores the influence of Die Hard on action cinema.
We're talking about Roadhouse, The Hunt for Red October, Under Siege, Passenger 57, Speed, The Rock, Skyscraper, and nearly 165 more movies.
These are action movies that couldn't exist without Die Hard, and its DNA is everywhere.
Die Hard on a Blank is a celebration of action movies and a deep dive into the ways that Die Hard shaped the action genre.
So if you're a casual fan or an action movie, Die Hard.
Ooh, very nice.
Die Hard on a Blank is for you.
Phil, do the line.
Now we have a podcast.
Ho, ho, ho. Follow Die Hard on a Blank now on your podcast app of choice.
Because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are. And we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
Welcome to Cows in the Field. This is a show in which we discuss philosophical themes in popular films. My name is Justin.
I'm Laura.
And today we're celebrating Thanksgiving by talking about the first of three 1990s Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan rom-com collaborations. John Patrick Shanley's lovely little forgotten gem, Joe versus the Volcano.
Some people say a man is made out of mud. Poor man's made out of muscle and blood. Muscle and blood and skin and bone. A mind that's weak and a back that's strong. You load 16 tons. What do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. Say, Nita, don't you call me, cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store.
And we'd like to welcome to the show for the first time Chad Perman. Chad is the founder and editor-in-chief of Bright Wall Dark Room and a big-time defender of the movie we're about to discuss. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Hello. Great to be here.
We're very excited to have you. And I said this before off mic, and I'll just say it again now. Thank you very much for suggesting this movie, because Laura and I had not seen it. And putting it before our eyes and bringing it on this show means a lot, because I think it's a really interesting and philosophical film. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
And also so much fun.
So much fun.
Yes.
Just like delightful from beginning to end.
I'm all about fun philosophy, yes.
Excellent. So, Chad, we want to start with kind of a softball / massive question, which is, I think a lot of people may either not remember this movie or, like us, have never seen it. And so what's a reason you think people should watch or revisit the movie?
Yeah, I feel like I'm in that dream where someone finally asks you the question you've been waiting for someone to ask you forever. While at the same time, I've been fine-tuning this pitch for 25 years. So I think it's an amazing movie. So that's if you know anything about me or Bright Wall Dark Room or anything like that, I talk way too much about this movie. I'm pretty sure 60 to 70% of people think it's a bit. It's 100% not a bit. I think it's a deeply fascinating philosophical film. I think every single time I watch it, it's kind of a weird comparison point here. Though I did actually just listen to the episode you guys did last Christmas with Emily St. James. My favorite movie, this is hard to say because I've always said Joe vs. Volcano. My actual favorite movie is It's a Wonderful Life. And I do see some overlaps and points of comparison here. Not necessarily in the plot or the structure, but in a lot of the kind of things it's getting at in the process. So
For sure.
Yeah. So I love my existential movies. I also love fun. And I also like being really pretentious and not pretentious at all. So this movie for me kind of puts it all together. I think for sure the first act is something almost any adult past about 25 can identify with pretty readily. And then I think it gets deeper. My background as a therapist, there's a lot of stuff around it being kind of a PTSD movie where, there's a very small little piece embedded in there that I probably missed the first 3 or 4 times is Joe was a fireman. And he basically, pun, sorry, intended here. He got burnt out, but he also got traumatized a whole lot. And just going through all of that left him in this position where he's just like, I'm going to take this just dead end job. I'm basically going to shut down all of my functioning in life. For me, it's the oldest story in the world, playing right into myth and everything else like that. But the idea that he takes kind of this hero's journey to recovery and catharsis and on transcendence and all those wonderful things that I love about life. That's great. This pitch is expanding. But yes, I did not go notice at the video store when I was 20. I would just say it's pretty funny. Lots of people you'll recognize in it. But it's just, if people give it a chance, that's all I ever really ask. I know lots of people that don't like it, and I've given this pitch to, and they're like, are we allowed to say that didn't work for me? And I'm like, of course, yes, absolutely. But for me, it works 100%. It's worked since I was about 20. So without giving away my exact age, it's been more than a couple decades of this being at the top of the list. So.
I think that's a great pitch. You said a number of things that I think we could pick up on and go in those different directions. But just to give people a sense of like the movie, and if you haven't seen it in a while and you're trying to remember what happens. So Tom Hanks plays this guy Joe, and he's working this crappy job. Where does he work?
Oh, you want
American Panoscope Company.
Yes.
It's
the home of the rectal probe.
Home of the rectal probe, yes.
That's right. So he's a medical supply guy. But he works as he works as like an accountant in there or whatever.
Excuse you. He's he's the advertising librarian.
Yeah, advertising librarian. Okay. So
he takes care of the catalogs. He can't order more catalogs, but he keeps track of how many catalogs there are.
He works a soulless white collar job. And he is told very early on in the movie that he is going to die in a few months because he has what? Laura likes this motion.
Brain cloud.
Yes.
Brain cloud.
It's like between
I didn't do it with my mic,
the two hemispheres of his brain, right? That's like right
Tom
there.
Hanks, every time he says brain cloud, he does like a little wipe over
always
his head.
a really, really funny, like euphemistic kind of phrase. It meant nothing, but sadly and unfortunately has it's associated now with long COVID. So it is an actual like thing in the world that people have brain fog. So at the time, it was complete nonsense, though. I will say, as someone who watched it in 1990, it was made up, and it was wonderful.
And it has importantly, to distinguish it from brain fog, I guess,
which has lots of
symptoms. It has
symptoms
symptoms.
No,
it just So he's told that he's going to die, and so then he realizes in that moment, right? Oh well, my life. I'm not going to waste the last 5 months of my life working at this crappy job. So he quits his job, and then in a sort of series of strange events, he meets this guy played by Lloyd Bridges named Graynamore, who basically hires him to jump into a volcano.
Sorry, just realizing gray no more, like gray no more, like your life will no longer be gray.
Lots of stuff.
Oh, very good. Yes, very good. Gray no more. And then that sort of sets him off on he accepts the thing. So Graynamore basically gives him lots of money to do this. He gets to live the last few months of his, a little bit of his life in a kind of luxury. And then he has to go jump in this volcano. And now the reason for that is kind of complicated. One of the really nice things about this, yes, but one of the really nice things about this film, directed by John Patrick Shanley, who's a writer, is it's just like really nicely written. It's really well written, and there's a real economy to the writing, and that Graynamore is able to explain this incredibly convoluted plan that why he needs him to jump into this volcano in the middle of the Pacific. It has to do with like getting this special, unobtainium like entity thing from the locals, and they need a human sacrifice to appease the gods in their volcano, and it's ridiculous, but it's sort of conveyed so cleanly and so but also zanily. Right? The whole
Yes.
movie is super zany.
I mean, I think the moment he shows up and just like waltzes
his
into
hair,
his,
you know.
his hair, he's got, and he like just waltzes and he's like, your apartment is dingy. Jump in a volcano. And you're just like, all right, like I'm going with this guy.
And that's Tom Hanks's reaction is like, okay, I'll do it.
Sure, why not?
He just has this way of handling himself where you're just like, I'm going to follow that guy.
Well, you also have that
he's got a
dichotomy
weird
of
energy.
like Robert Stack tells me I'm going to die, and then Lloyd Bridges tells me I can jump in a volcano and live like a king for the months before that. So
And be a hero, yeah.
and be a hero.
Yeah. And it's so okay. So that's just to give you a sense of the plot, dear listener. But here's the thing. One of the things you said, Chad, at the beginning that I want to pick up on is that this is a deep movie, but it's not taking itself too seriously. And
No,
that I
not
think
at
is
all.
like that is a very nice, like a lot of like the deepest films are comedies. And the comedy allows the more interesting philosophical insights to go down better, right? Because if the film doesn't do that, it's just going to be preaching at you. And there's like, in some ways, like nothing worse than a film just sitting there preaching at you. You know, that's like not an enjoyable thing. And most people are going to react very negatively to that. But the philosophy is imbued in, in the plot and in the, it's like deeply part of the, of what happens in the film. But also what happens in the film is really goofy and everything, all the characters are really zany. And we haven't yet mentioned it, but Meg Ryan plays 3 different characters who might be in some way the same character in some sense. And that's, and also the imagery of this American Panoscope place is very, heightened. There's this kind of German expressionist imagery there. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've seen, I've been down all possible Joe versus Volcano rabbit holes that exist. So, but there is a video on YouTube from 12, 15 years ago, where they show side by side the opening of Metropolis and then this opening of the 16 tons opening to, basically zombies marching to work. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's almost lifted directly. And I should say also, the thing that always fascinates me as an adult watching it is the highly stylized, pretty clearly fake in some, settings. Like it doesn't try to hide that, but it also doesn't work against it. And I haven't really figured out how that happens. So I have not cracked that particular code. It doesn't bother me in any way, but I'm like, this is not, this is
there's
not
like
just
a
normally
staginess to it.
Yes, it's stagey.
That's
not,
the word.
It's not intended to be realistic.
No, not at all.
But that helps it because then think about what other things are not realistic, but that tap into some of the deepest themes. Opera, for instance, right? And I think that makes it more, the theatricality allows us to appreciate what's happening on a metaphorical level or an allegorical level rather than on this kind of literal, like, there are interpretations of it, I think, and we'll talk some about these themes, where you could think of it as, a critique of capitalism and that kind of thing. That's there. But I actually think the film encourages you to go deeper and more abstract. And so, anyway.
Yeah, it's almost too easy to read it that way as the capitalistic critique. But it is there.
It's there, I think, yeah.
Regarding its like staginess and its special look, I was also thinking a little bit about Bram Stoker's Dracula. Did you think about that too, Justin?
Yeah.
Just in terms of its sort of like in camera tricks, matte painting, elaborate sets, like it's sort of like a throwback aesthetic in some ways, right when we're like on the cusp of something where, where the movies are going to take a totally different direction. But I read this interview he did with Matt Zoller-Seitz, but he's talking about when they're
This is the director.
Yes, sorry, excuse me. Shanley had an interview with Matt Zoller-Seitz at one point, and they talk about the ferry from Staten Island that he and Dee Dee stand on, and they're like standing on a gimbal where 2 guys are just rocking it back and forth, and then the water is black trash bags. That they're just wiggling around. And then the city, they basically made they can cut little gels and lit them individually for the buildings in the background.
Yeah.
So it does have this sort of jewel box, doll house, funny, it has this very special feeling that I think does allow us to just go on this hero's journey with him as if we're in a storybook.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And the opera thing, it's fascinating that you brought that. I mean, one of the in-jokes we have on our podcast is that we almost always end up talking about movies that somehow have an opera scene in them. And our very first episode, when for the most part, we pick month to month to kind of fly by the seat of our pants. But the first one was intentional. And our very first podcast episode 2 years ago was on Moonstruck. And that was very intentional. Huge opera scene, John Patrick Shanley. Not an accident. So,
one difference between film and theater is that with film, you have the opportunity to make things more realistic in the sense that you can actually film stuff. So if you want a shark, you can just film a shark, or you can, whatever. But you can't do that in the theater. So the theater, you need someone dressed in a shark suit coming on stage. And then people all know that's not real. And so then they're encouraged to, like, the imagination is, you have to fill that in with theater, right? And so this is a film that I think recalls more of that theatricality, and because it's stepping away from the kind of filmic conventions that dominated, right, in the 80s and to be fair, in the 90s as well. And that's why the hearkening back to, like, German Expressionism, when film and theater were much more entwined, when there wasn't that
Did you pick
distinction.
shark because of the fishing scene?
I'm still thinking about the shark.
Yes, I love that fishing scene.
I'm sorry, you said shark and I just started giggling. I think
love
I
that
sort
scene.
of got the point you said afterwards, but I just started giggling when you said shark.
Oh, that's one of my favorite scenes because that's just so silly.
There is, I do like that the film has the rectal probe, that it has the weird shark look, that's another, for me, one of the charms of it. And I don't know if that's a charm that comes on the third or fourth viewing, but it sounds like for you guys it came across, which is amazing.
Totally. No, totally. Yeah.
I'm at the point where I've seen it so many times, but I'm just endlessly charmed from the second it starts. It's charming is a big word that comes through my mind. But again, very well aware that not everybody feels that way. So
I think it's fine, of course, to not enjoy this movie. But I also think, like, if you're not enjoying this movie, I'm sort of like, what do you want from cinema? I'm sort of like, I don't know.
Thank you. That's like my whole
what else?
pitch that I gave you before we started. That's a way better pitch. Like, if you don't like this, what do you like about cinema?
Get out.
I don't know. If the movie was more preachy, I could see people being like, there it is going on its preachy way again. But, like, it's not. It's nice.
It's the
and
opposite.
it kind of allows you to come to these insights that it's laying out before you on its own. Let me give one example of this. So you mentioned in your sort of pitch for the film, that you could think of it as a film about trauma. And that's because we learn when Joe is being diagnosed that he had previously worked in his, earlier part of his life as a fireman. And this is important because Graynamore uses that as a way of, bringing him back into the fold. He's like, look, you were a hero once. And I think it's interesting that before Joe suffered from hypochondria, right, where he felt like he was always sick and all that, he described his life like this. He says, in the beginning, meaning I guess before I worked at this crappy job, I was piss and vinegar. Nothing got me down. And I think it's interesting that it was during his time as a firefighter where he, as was described by Dr. Ellison, was constantly experiencing the imminent possibility of death, that his life was, in some sense, meaningful. He wasn't plagued by the existential crises that he is later at Panoscope. And so the doctor, Ellison, just thinks that, well, what happened is that, you spent so long as a firefighter and these brushes with death led you to constantly be worrying about dying, and that's why you're hypochondriac. But I actually read I think the doctor's diagnosis is in some ways accurate, but it's not accurate for the reasons he thinks it is. So I think he's right that it was the transition from firefighter to whatever office worker that led to his existential crisis, which is the source of his hypochondria. But I think it in part was the lack of the experiencing the imminent possibility of death on a daily or weekly basis that is now what's led to this kind of stasis, And so I feel like it's not as if was worried about dying and that's what led him to be a hypochondriac. It's that now he's not worried about dying and that's what's led him to be a hypochondriac. And the weird medicine is actually to reintroduce the possibility of death and finitude
Ernst
in his
Becker,
life, which right, which brings back his meaning and his, and his joie de vivre, so to speak. So I'm curious what you thought about that, because I agree there is also a kind of trauma thing going on, although it feels to me very off stage. And so that's why I
don't want to give anyone the
it.
idea that this is like some like harrowing traumatic journey. Like there's none of that in the movie. It doesn't flash back to him like rescuing kids from fires or anything like that. Yeah.
Right.
What you see is, what often shows up in a therapist's office. You see the after effects. You see a person that is a shell of a person that has, there's some Virginia Woolf line here that I'm going to totally butcher, but actually it might be George Eliot, but it's one of those people that I love. You can't shut off one part of your emotions without shutting down all of them. So that's pretty much the deal that he's making is, hey, I can't handle stuff, so I'm shutting it all down. And that's what you see when you see that first scene, which again is a comedic scene that I think works on a comedic level at like high levels. Which the famous line of like, I know you can do the job, but whatever, like that Dan Hedaya thing.
Oh yeah, the Hedaya.
I mean that whole I could talk for 5 hours about just that opening like 20 minutes, because it's such a perfect encapsulation of someone who is just literally like at the end of their line career wise. There's no climbing the corporate ladder here for Joe Banks. He kind of has a crush on this secretary, Dee Dee, played by Meg Ryan, who I actually heard last night in a Meg Ryan interview from the time the movie was released. She said she modeled Dee Dee on her own dog. So she's like, that was, my very loving but not so bright dog. And then it shows various clips and you just start laughing. But yeah, so he's got this, crush. It's not like he's got a crush on like, some woman who's way out of his league. He's got a crush on the secretary in the office. He's got the boss from hell who, God, yes. But it's funny. That's the part I keep wanting. I don't want to lose that thread. It's hilarious, but it's also so sad and tragic when you realize what the comedy's hiding there, which is like where Joe's at.
Right.
And his little, go ahead.
Oh yeah. Well, I was thinking maybe where the trauma is what's, I think, the interesting thing. So the doctor thinks the trauma was in the experience of the confrontation with death. But in fact, I think the trauma is the monotony of the post-firefighter job that he's in. So the trauma is just experiencing an unending, incessant life of sameness.
And because he's limited in so much himself, I mean, through the choices he's made, through, the hypochondria is kind of a result of maybe some of his situation, but everything else there is like he purposely just winnowed his life down to this little job in this little office where he doesn't even have the power, like, you were saying, to order the magazines. He can just let people know when the magazines need to be ordered or whatever it is. But the thing I love there too, I mean, it's one of my favorite things. I know I talked about it in that essay, but he's got his little like survival kit of stuff. So he's got his little magic lamp, the lamp that the guy's like, shut that off to get that lamp out of here. I love lamp, but he's got the lamp there, and and he's got Robinson Crusoe. I mean, again, Shanley, I love him. I still love him. He is a wackadoodle guy out on whatever social media he decides to be on that day, where he just he loves words so much that it's one of those people that's just like, I just love that there are people like him in the world still. But he puts so much into there and so much that you can read. So I always call it his survival kit, where he has his ukulele, a copy of Robinson Crusoe, and the lamp. And all of those things come back throughout the movie, not literally, but figuratively or symbolically, or, so there's a high level of intelligence going on here, which I know that nobody thinks of when they think of Joe versus the Volcano. But he's planting little seeds all over the place, philosophically, metaphorically, guideposting, signpost. I mean, I think it's a really, really smart screenplay.
I think that's totally right. I mean, so the other aspect of the trauma or depression or existential malaise that I think Joe is facing, which isn't overtly commented on, but it is totally present, is that I think Joe is a deeply lonely character when we first meet him. So he, as we learn, has no family. He seems to have no friends. And one of the reasons we know this is that once he's given the money by Graynamore, he has this nice day on the town, and he gets to share it with a bunch of strangers. He shares it with the driver, and he shares it with the guy who helps him get the trunks and all
The
that.
luggage guy.
My favorite
The
luggage guy.
Laura's
Yeah,
favorite guy.
everyone loves luggage guy. Yeah, he's great.
Carol Kane for like 2 seconds.
Yeah, the hairdresser and all that. But he shares these moments but with strangers. And then at the end of the night, pointedly, he goes and gets a drink alone. And he goes to bed alone. And this is, in principle, his last night in New York. He may never come back. I mean, for all he knows, he's never coming back to New York. He has no one to see or to say goodbye to. Like, that is really, I mean, that's got to be a really tough and difficult and depressing existence where, you have a dead-end job, but not only that, you don't have anyone to commiserate, right, about this job with. I mean, he tries to form a kind of common bond with Dee Dee, but she ends up, rebuffing him when she finds out that he's about to die. And
That's always a buzzkill. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I do think, like, it is. We've talked a little bit about this at various points on this podcast about loneliness and about, in particular, like male loneliness, and the difficulties of finding male friendships in the modern world, in like post-college world in the U.S. and especially in metropolitan areas, and how a lot of your friendships and stuff comes from, your familial bonds, like your spouse and your kids and that kind of thing. And he has none of that. And so I think this is a really tough situation to be in. And that's part of, I think, the diagnosis of his trauma or / malaise.
Well, and I think too, I mean, this is extrapolating. This is not anywhere in the movie, but the few firemen that I know in my real life, that is a deeply fraternal like job. Like you live with those people, you are embedded. So to walk away from that is not just walking away from the trauma. It's also walking away from the adrenaline, from the identity of yourself as, if anyone hears that you're a fireman, it's just instant kind of respect. People like firemen. They're not problematic in any way that I'm aware of. And also, yeah, they basically, I mean, it's maybe not quite the military, but it's in terms of that brotherhood and sisterhood that they experience. As I mean, they sit around waiting for there to be chaotic disasters altogether, and then they rush out and go solve them, and then they come back and kind of process their trauma in that weird guy way where they just talk about everything else, But so he lost all that, and I think that's a really important piece too in the loneliness. And I don't think he knows how to function, in society. And I don't. But, and what I really kind of, when I connected with the movie the most, it was more around like, oh, it's not just that he doesn't know how to do it. It's also like he doesn't have any desire to do it. There's no life force. There's no vitality there anywhere in him those first 20 minutes. And that's why for me, as he goes on this journey and all those people pick the website you want to map it to, because they'll give you different people, but all these people are basically like these guides on his journey. The luggage guy, all of them are giving these little aphorisms and these little like deep / funny / you could also just pass right by and not even notice that something just happened scenes. But there's one thing that Ossie Davis, the guy, the limo driver, is taking him to all these places. There's some version of this where they go off and have a buddy comedy together, but he makes it so clear, like right when you think like, oh, look, he's got this friend who's going to accompany him. And he asks him to dinner and he's like, no, I got it. I got my own family. And then he says that line, which is, perfect, which is like, there's some doors a man's got to walk through alone, which sets up this whole thing for like, okay, yes, you got to go on your hero's journey now. I can take you this far, but I'm not the one who's going to ride on the raft with you,
Yeah, I wonder if you'd want to have dinner with me tonight.
I can't do that. I got the wife and kids at the end of the day,
Yeah.
Everything's at check-in when you're ready, sir.
Listen. Haven't you got anybody?
No. But there are certain times in your life when I guess you're not supposed to have anyone, Certain doors you gotta go through alone.
You're gonna be all right.
So I think there are different dimensions. I think he has, I'm just going to reiterate what we just talked about, but then I'm going to add one more thing. So there's one, which is a kind of lingering trauma from his past. There's the trauma or malaise, existential malaise of his job. There's the loneliness and not having any human connections. But I also think he wants to know who he is and doesn't know who he is. Like this kind of he doesn't know himself. And this is reflected in a couple of ways. So one is when he's at the restaurant with Dee Dee, he's like,
who am I? That's the real question, isn't it? Who am I? Who are you? What other questions are there? What other questions are there, really? If you want to understand the universe, embrace the universe, the door to the universe is you.
Me?
You? Me?
You are really intense.
Am I?
which is one of my favorite lines of the whole movie. So there's that part. But then there's also in the subsequent middle act where he meets all those guys, as you talked about, Ossie Davis and so on. Each one of those people knows exactly who they are. Ossie Davis is like, my view is the clothes make the man. And that other guy, the luggage guy, is like, luggage is the most important thing. And all the Meg Ryan characters.
Which also pays off at the end of the movie.
Yeah, the single preoccupation of my life. Exactly.
Yes.
And when he meets Angelica, the second Meg Ryan character, right? Like she both her and Patricia in some ways like know who they are, and they're not like happy with who they are, but they sort of know who they are. They know the choices they've made and the mistakes that they've made, and they're processing that in terms of their relationship to their father. And so it's like he meets all these people who are fully defined people who understand themselves, and he is a kind of blank slate who doesn't understand himself until the end of the movie. So one of the like journeys is like he has to go through this kind of process of self-realization. And you get there a little bit when he's on the boat and he's just like,
I've been doing some soul searching lately, been asking myself some pretty tough questions. You know what I found out? I have no interest in myself. I start thinking about myself, I get bored out of my mind.
Which, God, that works even better in 2023. But just the idea of like, hey, the way through life is not to think about yourself 24/7. It's actually so counterintuitive to how a human being can be content or find meaning or purpose in life. And again, it's just a little dropped in line in the middle of a otherwise kind of funny, humorous restaurant scene that they're having. So yeah,
totally.
No preaching, but the message is
no,
there.
exactly. No preaching. So yeah, and then you were mentioning this as I was talking. I want to highlight it. Yeah. So in that middle act, which is the probably like the most fun in some ways part of the movie, because he gets to go around spending all the money.
It's like the Pretty Woman montage.
No, I was going to say,
you get a little bit more.
Pretty Woman came out 3 weeks after this movie, and
wait, really?
Yes, yeah, that's where we were at in the culture. Yes, and her montage is way different.
We just love to watch people get like a gold credit card and spend it.
Yeah. But like the stuff he buys,
it's got a
when he's buying it.
To it, yeah.
Well, yes. Well, but when he's buying it,
he
you're like,
does not know that
this is all stupid stuff. First of all, like when he goes to Hammacher Schlemmer, I'm just sitting there
both
like,
start laughing.
Oh, you're like he's going to the most frivolous, stupid store.
And he doesn't have that much to pack into luggage. I mean, it's not.
He's got to fill those.
He's got to get
boxes.
that lamp and that book and that ukulele. But
yeah. And the violin, what is it? Violin bar.
Violin bar.
Yeah.
He's got the radio and the umbrella. Yeah.
And then his little putt-putt set.
And the mini golf set. That's
yes, I did forget about that.
Which all come back, of course, as we know, when he's shipwrecked, to provide some degree of comfort that sustains him in this, in this moment when of what would be, I think, a moment of true abject terror, but actually weirdly is, I think, one of the moments of the film where Joe is actually the most content with his life, which is really kind of intriguing because he spent like the first half of the film being like, I don't know who I am. I hate life. Like I don't have anything to live for. And then at the moment when he's basically floating on these 4 trunks, I mean, if you really think about it, the movie, again, it's so silly and lighthearted. It doesn't draw that much attention to this. But if you really think about what it would be like to be shipwrecked, floating in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
Oh, I've thought about it.
Right? It would be absolutely horrifying with the prospect that you may never be
I can come up with.
found. And he seems, I mean, I really do think he seems, I mean, of course he gets dehydrated eventually, but during that sequence, he seems
that's when he's dancing. Yeah.
He's dancing. He's so happy. He's shaving. Like he's living like the kind of life that we all would, in some sense, like the good life. He's living in a version of the good life.
Away
on
from
this
the things
raft.
of man. Yeah.
Yes. He's got a couple things of man.
He's got a couple things of man, but yeah.
but he's basically, again, facing down imminent death, and he's perfectly
His timeline
content.
just keeps getting shorter.
Yeah.
Thinks he has 5 months, and then he thinks he has like 2 weeks before he gets in the volcano, and now he's like, okay, tomorrow.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he keeps also trading that for worse death. He's like, I got 5 months to live, but painless, but like no symptoms. Now I'm going to shorten it up, and then I'm going to have a pretty, go out in a blaze of glory. But that probably doesn't feel good to be on a volcano. And then like by no choice of his own, but now he's floating on the ocean, and he's like, I don't know, 3 days, dehydration, shark attack.
I know. Yeah.
I don't know.
But this leads to, and I know this is your favorite scene of the whole film, his encounter with the moon. When did it crystallize that this scene was really important?
Yeah, I mean that was my portal, and it still works. Again, a couple decades later, I keep waiting for the moment, and it will be a very sad moment if it ever happens, when that scene doesn't give me chills and doesn't work for me. I don't think I can get tired of it. I am careful not to watch it out of context too often. I think you do need the movie. You can certainly get a little hit of, or maybe a whiff of some of it if you just watch the YouTube clip of the scene, but you really have to watch the movie to get to the point where he's at, because he's so broken down, and he's so, but not in a bad way necessarily. I mean, he's broken down to the things that actually matter, which is, obviously a huge storytelling kind of thing throughout the history of humankind, is like, hey, you kind of got to lose everything and really just realize how amazing everything is. If you can get to that kind of, if you can hold those tensions together, I think that's kind of the secret of life. Never losing the awe, and that's when I think he becomes curious once he gets his diagnosis. I think he becomes open-minded. I think he has purpose and meaning, which is going to galvanize a lot of people's kind of internal resources. But what I love about it, and I think this comes from Shanley, I don't know him, but my guess is, based on how I've seen him be over the years, that there's just a lot of Shanley in this character, and that what he's doing there is just kind of opening up to the universe and trusting that the universe in some way is this amazing place that he's kind of, for the first, I mean, it's almost like this childlike view. Like, we lose that, and I maybe wrote about that. I wrote that like 10 years ago. So if it's in there, then I'm sorry if I'm paraphrasing myself, but the idea,
I think that's okay.
The idea that the secret to things is not, getting a job and going to the office every day, all that kind of stuff, that it's actually like, oh my God, a single leaf is amazing, let alone the freaking moon that we all look at every night and think almost nothing about. Or tonight we might be mad that it showed up earlier because it's daylight savings time. But the point is, like, it's amazing that there's a moon. It's an amazing, I mean, I literally was thinking this the other day, not related to the movie, but just thinking of, a very obvious thought. It probably sounds stupid out loud, but I was like, that's the same moon that Shakespeare looked at. That's the same moon that Homer looked at. It's amazing that just hangs there, and it's the same thing, and it's accessible to us all the time. And for the most part, it becomes a backdrop in every one of our lives. Even if we set an intention to pay purposeful attention to how amazing the moon is, we can only keep that up for a few days, which is not possible. So what I love about this scene is he's about to die. I mean, he doesn't, spoiler alert.
But he could. He very well could.
Yes, he is dehydrated. So there is that
Yeah.
Intensity that you only get when you're really just kind of super dehydrated or super high. And he's sitting there and, we haven't mentioned even that possibly this woman that he's fallen in love with might not be okay. She's passed out there. So he's all alone, and she's technically there, but who knows what's going on with her, if she'll come back. He's feeding her those little sips of water and all that cute stuff. But then he's sitting there at kind of the worst moment, where he's like, okay, yeah, maybe my life ends here on this, luggage raft that I'm on. And then the moon starts, and, there's a it's highly stylized. There's no way that that's a real moon or that any of this is real. But I mean, it's just the line that he says, and I think about that line all the time in the last 20 years. It's not "thank you for my life," which I love. But it's the part where he can't even finish the sentence where he said, I forgot how big. And he stops, and I get like, I'm tearing up thinking about it. It's like, I forgot how big. Like, this is amazing. So I don't know if I've actually answered any of the question you were asking, but
no,
that's
great.
why it does it for me. Is that scene just works every single time and connects me with a part of myself that I like to remember exists way more often than I tend to. So.
Dear God, whose name I do not know, thank you for my life. I forgot how big. Thank you. Thank you for my life.
Totally. So I want to connect what you're saying, Ched, I think, because you're tapping into something several philosophers have tapped into. So just to draw on other connections here, what I think the movie is doing here is I think it's a really powerful and maybe even one of the like most poignant depictions of Kant's notion of the sublime. This is this idea that, and it arises out of a tension. So it was interesting that you talked about tension, that this being a moment of tension, but also like overwhelming joy. And so what Kant says is, I'll give you two quotes from Kant. So this is from the Critique of Judgment. I busted out my copy of the Critique of Judgment for this episode. Okay, so one quote is this. So this notion of sublime obviously predates Kant. It's a common notion that various philosophers, especially working in the philosophy of art, were trying to, give a kind of content to. But Kant thinks it's this. So he says, two quotes here, "That is sublime in comparison with which everything else is small." So that's the first idea, that the sublime is something awe-inspiring. So it has to be big. It has to be somehow, overwhelming in this way. So this moon is huge. He even comments on how big, ... We don't know what he's referring to. But the second quote is, "That is sublime, which even to be able to think of demonstrates a faculty of mind that surpasses every measure of the senses." So what Kant means here is that roughly for him, it's the sublime is the feeling of being overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of something, but in a way that's pleasurable because it reminds you that you can apprehend something so great because of the power of your own intellect. It's this thing which is way bigger than you, so you're like, I'm so small, but at the same time, I'm big too because I'm able to appreciate it, right? There's this like the expanse of my mind that's able to grok this massive thing. And that, I think, is a way of putting it, it's a different spin than what you said, but it's in the same ballpark, I think, that like this idea of like, pay attention to these things because they are reminders of the kind of marvelousness of our own existence, of how wonderful and strange and unique and powerful our own existence is. And
that we're able to observe it.
Yeah, that we can observe it is that amazing thing of us that like is distinctive of us. Like, I love my cats, but the cats cannot appreciate the sublime, right? And neither,
and
neither can the moon.
Right?
Neither
I heard
can
you guys
the moon.
have a cat tree, so.
Well, yeah, the cats. Look,
they have never appreciated.
I'll tell you
sublime,
what the cats
though.
appreciate.
I think
food.
the cat might have thought I didn't realize how big this cat tree was.
Yeah. I never knew how big.
So anyway, I think there are very few movies, I think, that really, when I was thinking about this, I was like, what other movies do the sublime well? And I think this is just like in some ways perfect distillation of the idea. And it is really powerful. And it's something we all have a familiarity with because we all know that feeling of being like, oh yeah, now I can attend to this thing, which was otherwise commonplace, right? It's just like a mountain or it's just like a hill or whatever. But you attend to it in a way which is like I don't know, like it
Well, there's that whole,
simultaneously
tension is love,
diminishes you and makes you big, which is cool.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, my head just kind of bounces in about 100 different areas listening to you talk through the philosophies of stuff. But isn't there a school of thought that among some people that they think that part of the whole point of the universe is learning to be conscious of itself? Like, is that resonating at all? Like,
yeah.
Okay.
So the other philosopher that I think this film is, I would guess Shanley has read Heidegger, but Heidegger is a big part of this film, I think. And one of Heidegger's ideas
We'll take your word for it, Jeff.
Well, I'll tell you, we'll get to it in a second, but one of Heidegger's ideas is this very thing of like, what is distinctive about us as human beings is that we are these like self-reflexive beings who sort of recognize our own being. And for Heidegger, there's a paradox at the core of this, which is that part of our being is that we are essentially finite and bounded. So we are recognizing of our own death. We know that like inevitably we are going to die. And that is a kind of, reflexive consciousness that rocks don't have, and even like monkeys don't have, but like, and that is something that's distinctive about, human consciousness, that we have this kind of ability to reflect on our own existence. That's an idea that's like, predates Heidegger, but Heidegger's spin on it is that finitude is the essential feature of being. So that's why his big
Did you say
opus is
finitude or infinitude?
Finitude,
okay.
that we're bounded entities. So, the idea is that, that's why his big book was Being and Time, that like it will end. And so, anyway, but the reason why this is related to the film is that death hangs over Joe's head, right? Like in a very literal way. And it's only through the kind of conscious affirmation, that's such a big Heideggerian word, of death. This idea that like he doesn't just see that he's going to die, but he goes out to meet death. Right? On the precipice of the volcano, I think it's really telling that he's given this choice. He doesn't have to jump. In fact, he's given a lot of reason not to jump. He's just fallen in love with Patricia, right? They could, it's not that at that point, he thinks he's going to die maybe in a few weeks, but he could still have 3 weeks with Patricia, which is better than 0 weeks with Patricia, with a woman he loves. And yet he jumps. And there is this kind of steadfast, like, acceptance, not just acceptance, but like, going to greet death. And
he's got to do what he's got to do.
I know. And but this is like, so I don't really buy into this Heideggerian idea, but it is so essential to Heidegger's philosophy that like, that to him is like, that's like the liberatory mood. That's how you attain true authentic being.
By greeting death?
Yes. And so just to give you an idea of this, I read this thing, this is kind of funny. So later on in his life, in a lecture, someone asked Heidegger how we might orient ourselves to an authentic disposition towards death. And here's what Heidegger said: we should simply aim to spend more time in graveyards.
Yes.
So that's
they didn't have any volcanoes in Germany.
No. But I mean, that advice is not, I feel like, besides Heidegger, that's echoed throughout basically that familiarity with death. I mean, once you accept that that you're finite, once you accept that everything you attach to is one day going to go away, and also you yourself are going to go away, that's when you can be free. That this idea that like all this other stuff is just stuff that gets in the way. And I'm, as a therapist, again, was the reason I read it. But one of my favorite books, I read about every 10 years, because if I read it more than that, it'd be a bit much, but is The Denial of Death by Ernst Becker. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's the same. I mean, it's the same stuff. He just more, it wasn't really his idea as much as it was a compilation of all the different people that have thought that through, the centuries. It's something that philosophers and Stoics and other things just eventually always come to, is you have to accept the fact that you're going to die. And once you do that, there is a liberation to that. But you have to really do it. And I think, so for me, it gets bound up with that idea. And then the other thing, which I love, the word is a little bit has some baggage to it because it's got religious in it. But William James is the Varieties of Religious Experience. That's the moon scene, right? That's he just talks about all this spiritual ecstasy that people experience. But when he looks into it, since he's William James and he's, being as critical as you were allowed to be in public and that time of religion, he's basically saying like, yeah, all these experiences, you can't really explain them. And we do put this word called religion or God around some of them, but really it's just the transcendent or the cathartic, and that getting in touch with that in whatever way it happens, whether you frame that as God came to me in a vision, or, I saw a moon on a raft in a John Patrick Shanley movie, or whatever it is. It's that same realization though.
Yeah, there are two sides. So the Heideggerian notion is like, it's totally inward. It's supposed to be like, you recognize the finitude of your own death that allows you to authentically live, or the finitude of your own life that allows you to authentically live. But then the thing that you said that I think is really cool, Chad, is that actually, if you think of this in terms of transcendence, what is transcendence but that actually, connecting or leaving or transcending your own self, right? Mm-hmm. And the thing that you said about the moon that I thought was really powerful and is not reflected in what Heidegger is thinking about, and potentially not really reflected with what Kant's thinking about, but is a different insight altogether. And a really powerful one is that part of what he's potentially seeing in the moon is a connection to not just nature, but to the rest of humanity. Mm-hmm. And the way you put it as like, it's the same moon Shakespeare saw, and it's the same moon that, right, like Caesar saw or whatever. And like, you're like, yeah, that is so powerful to feel like, yes, this is bigger than me. I'm part of this massive story that is humanity, but isn't that cool that I'm connected to all these people?
Yeah.
And that's the thing he's missing at the beginning of the movie. He has no connections. And then to go from that to being like, no, actually, in a weird way, I'm connected to everyone who's ever lived. And that's kind of cool.
And I experienced that entirely by myself on this raft looking at this movie. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, in a 1990 Meg Ryan, Tom Hanks romantic comedy. So.
This movie is freaking deep.
I'm just glad that I've got someone else to talk about it with.
No, this is good stuff. Should we just like do a quick sidebar on Meg Ryan playing 3 different characters?
There's got to be some philosophy in there. Yeah.
I don't know. There could be, but I just want to talk about which
great.
One's your favorite.
All right, yeah, let's ask this. Let's just start with with the hard question.
Yeah.
Who's your favorite of the 3?
I mean, I don't think it's a hard question at all.
No?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, for me, it's Patricia because she's
a
seeker, and Joe's a seeker. And she rejects, again, there is quite a whole lot of rejecting of capitalism in there. But she tried really, really hard to get out of capitalism, with her rich, powerful father. Obviously, he tricks / manipulates her into actually rejoining all of this life that she's trying to get away from, in the service of him making even more money from this bizarro product on this island that, so there's that whole thread. But what I love, I mean, again, it's some of the lines, and this is not Meg Ryan, though I think she delivers them beautifully, because there is a version of almost every line in this movie where it just doesn't work and it's just a disaster of a movie. But that line about, my father says there's only a few people that are truly alive and they live every moment in total constant amazement. Like, that's also a thought that goes through my head all the time. Like, that's an option in life. We could choose that. It's really, really hard to hold to for more than about 10, 15 minutes of time. But I do think, for what it's worth, that where you guys are at in life, it's a lot easier to access that with a 4-year-old in the house,
Absolutely.
Because everything is amazing to a 4-year-old when they're in a decent mood.
Everything is amazing or terrible.
Yeah.
We went raspberry picking and our kid kept going, this is the best day of my life.
I mean, he got to go pick raspberries. Like, imagine getting to do that for the first time. Like, that we're so jaded, like, whatever ages you guys are and whatever age I am. Like going to pick raspberries, like I was like, well, I got to drive out there and there might be traffic.
Yeah,
and
Justin's like, do you know this is at a grocery store?
Like,
why am I?
No, I mean, my view on raspberry picking is like, I'm not going to pay someone to do labor.
To do labor.
Like, to do their labor.
Justin's just like grimacing in the background. He's like, do you know these bushes are prickly? Why are these prickly?
Yeah.
Ethan's like, I'm having
and God, don't get the
moment.
raspberries in the car because they stain like crazy. Yeah, I mean, there's just all this stuff.
Yeah.
And
and we paid $14 for these raspberries.
Oh no, you're gonna tell
them. And then we left them in the Airbnb.
We left them at the Airbnb.
Oh, no.
We
We
love
didn't even
them.
eat them.
I ate many of
And
them,
if-
but no, they were.
If your child ever remembers any of it, they'll remember that it was awesome that they got to do it, and they'll remember the feeling they had with you. You guys will remember the details. But again,
yeah,
the details are what bog us down, and I think that's what Joe versus Volcano gets at a lot is there is this view of the world where, again, you have to set an intention. It helps if you've maybe been broken down completely and a hypochondriac for years, and finally someone just shows up who is Robert Stack again, which the gravitas of him, and says, "Yeah, you're gonna die, and you're right about all this stuff, and it's this mysterious thing, and then you're free, and then you get to like re-experience everything, and I think actual figure, it's a weird comparison here, but just where my brain grabbed first. But like, Steve Jobs, when he found out he was going to die, became a very different human being than Steve Jobs was up until that point. And that's it's a commonplace thing when someone gets that kind of news. There's lots of different ways to take it. It's obviously not the way everybody takes it, but there is an aspect of, everything else goes away that's not important, and you really can see things much clearer, which I think Joe does.
Yeah. I mean, that's the Heideggerian idea. But right, because it is like once you authentically embrace death, that is, you sort of actually really do embrace that you're going to die, because we all know we're going to die.
Yeah.
Nobody here is under the misapprehension that we're not going to die.
We work really hard to not think about that, though.
Yeah, but that's the thing is we try to not sort of see it head on, right? So that's Heidegger's idea. But anyway, but I do agree that it for whatever reason it like crystallizes something. So he's right about something. I'm somewhat resistant to it for other reasons, which we may not get into. But I wanted to ask. So
I
Patricia,
think we have 3 different faves.
Patricia, I know.
Sorry,
we have 3 different faves.
definitely did not answer the Meg Ryan stuff.
No, you did. You did.
You
Patricia,
did. Yours is Patricia. She's
Laura.
the seeker.
Well, yeah, Laura, what's yours?
What's yours?
Angelica.
The Flibberty Gibbet?
The Flibberty Gibbet.
I'm a Flibberty Gibbet. Sure. Her accent.
I would say
her
she makes
look.
me laugh the most by far. Yeah.
Oh my! Her poetry.
The poetry is one of my
Would
favorite
you like
scenes.
to hear it again? It's so good.
Would you like to hear one of my poems?
Sure.
Long ago, the delicate tangles of his hair covered the emptiness of my hands. Would you like to hear it again?
Okay.
And then she does it, and they let it play out for the whole second time.
Yeah, it's true.
Oh man, yeah, no,
Yeah.
Angelica all the way.
Yes. She's
I'm a
wonderful.
Dee all the way.
Oh,
You love Dee Dee.
I love Dee Dee.
I know.
Well, I think she has my favorite line. Me? And yeah, I think like I don't know. Maybe I'm secretly a dog person. I don't know, but
Maybe.
knowing that she modeled her character after her dog. But
Well, I was thinking about like why 3 Meg Ryans, and we mentioned you called it his survival kit, his essentials, and his desk.
Oh,
drawer.
there's
He's got
3 things there.
ukulele.
Yeah.
He's got ukulele, Robinson Crusoe, The Odyssey, which
Oh, I
seems
forgot. Yes, the Odyssey.
obvious,
Yeah.
and Romeo and Juliet.
yeah.
And at first I was thinking like the 3 women are like he keeps basically encountering the same woman in different forms because he keeps not quite getting it right. Like the world is giving him another chance. But now I think like that's not totally right too, because it's not also that his timing is wrong or that he doesn't push hard enough or go for it or go for the kiss. It's also that these women are all in different places in their lives and struggling with their own demons and their own anxieties. And they're not always in a place to meet him. Like he lays it all out with Gigi and she runs away from him because she's too scared of of the enormity of what he's dealing with. And he's too intense for her. And similarly, Angelica she's sort of like chosen her life. She knows her eyes are wide open about where she's at, but she's depressed.
Yeah,
she doesn't want to engage.
Yeah, she's not willing to hear any kind of pushback on whatever. Yeah.
No, she's not there. And like it's only until he meets another seeker, as you say, who's in the right moment, right? They're star-crossed lovers again and again until they are no longer star-crossed and they can like go on this journey together. But like it's as if I like that throughout the universe there is the Meg Ryan character who's also trying to like find her way and eventually get in form of Patricia finds Joe. just at the right time.
It's the reason. Yeah, I think it plays on so many levels because it gives Meg Ryan like a showcase, right? She gets to be not just the manic pixie dream girl or whatever, but she gets to just be different shades of these rom-com women. But it's also like, I don't know if it was like this for you, Chad, but I sort of feel like they kind of represent different women you've dated in your life.
I mean,
like you think back on it and you're like, oh yeah, I dated a Dee when then I
Did you date an Angelica?
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah. Those people are exciting.
Damn it! I'm not your Angelica. I'm so upset about this.
No, you're obviously my Patricia. We ended up together. But yeah. But I don't know. I just feel like that's kind of. Like I feel like Shanley's kind of drawing on maybe like different
big archetypes too, yeah.
From his, yeah.
Oh, and I should say, like just context wise, because I am one of those people that bought it's right here. Joe versus the Volcano, Five Corners, and Moonstruck screenplays are all shoved together in a book. But he writes an introduction to that. I didn't know this, or actually I should say I've known this at various times and forget it all the time. So I just remembered tonight through reading that introduction again. He wrote this right after he got out of a really bad marriage. He wrote this when he had just, he'd got out of a bad marriage. He'd won the Oscar for Moonstruck. His life was finally getting on target. He'd had a pretty shitty childhood and upbringing, pretty violent Irish family. He went through a lot of stuff. He was disconnected from a lot of his own people. So he was kind of like, Joe Banks was him. He kind of just directly says it in the thing. And what he did there too was, he started writing Joe once he had gotten married to somebody who he said is much better for him. When his career started to get on track, the weird January Man stuff aside, because that wasn't really his fault. So it is a terrible movie. Truly never watch it. But then with Joe versus the Volcano, and again, there is a heartbreaking tragedy to all this stuff here. But Steven Spielberg read the script, right? And Steven Spielberg said, I want to make this. And think of all the times that Steven Spielberg has done that for people and their careers take off. So he was writing this and shooting this from a place of, this is my moment. And he says in the introduction, he said, Mr. Spielberg was my Graynamore. He's like, go make the movie that you want. Go do everything you want. Here's all the money. He didn't have to jump into any kind of volcano that I'm aware of. But he did... he was on this path. And so he was feeling that vitality. So I think that just is sprinkled and infused throughout the entire screenplay, throughout the magic of the movie. Of course, the heartbreaking part here, which anyone who's familiar with this movie that hasn't seen it is familiar usually with this part, is it was such a complete bomb that he wasn't allowed to make movies for 20 years. And that's the part that I'm always like, oh my God, like this movie, this movie did that to him. And of course, the happy ending is he shows up and he's like, oh, hey, I can write a movie called Doubt based on the play that I wrote called Doubt, and I can win that way. So it all worked out okay for him, and we won't talk about the last movie he made. But it's just heartbreaking that he set it all up as like, this is my chance. The doors are all open for me here. I've got Meg Ryan, I've got Tom Hanks, I've got Steven Spielberg and Amblin producing it. We're going to have a big opening, and it just total disaster, savaged. People hated it except for Roger Ebert. So
that reminds me of one of the central imagery motifs of the film, which is the lightning bolt and the zigging and zagging, something you wrote about in your essay. And one of the things that is so poignant about and resonant with his life is that what is this lightning bolt path? Well, you could. Again and again, it's shown to be a path, right? It's a crooked path from A to B, but then it zigs and zags all the way. And if you think about like his career, but if of course you think about Joe's journey and all that, it reflects a similar pattern, which is like he thought he was on a straight path to to like successful
fireman of the year.
Exactly. And then it just zags all over the place. And similarly with Shanley.
Yes.
It's like
Oscars,
whatever.
Shanley's not even a lightning bolt. It is.
And then it just zags and wigs and zags. But what I think is so interesting is that if you think of like the actual layout of the lightning bolt, like the endpoints are fixed, right? It's birth and death. And the zags are really the interesting bits. That's the parts where life gets fun, where it's like where it's unpredictable. And the movie's like that too. The movie says
it's very
very early on, it tells you,
it's very odd.
Yeah, but very early on, the movie tells you exactly where it's going to go. It says, you're going to go jump into a volcano. And he goes, okay. And then at the end, he jumps into a volcano. It's just what's fun about it is all the zags and all the little journeys that he goes on in between, where a lot of those beats are exactly as Graynamore tells him. It's like, you're going to go get all this money.
Yeah.
Then you're going to be flown out
Live
to
like a king.
LA.
No.
And then you're going to take a yacht and whatever. And those things all happen. But in between each of those is a bunch of zags. And it's in the course of those zags that he falls in love and comes to appreciate, the vastness of the universe and like all these things where he finds meaning in his life. And anyway, so I just think it's such a potent metaphor, and it's cool to see it reflected in Shanley's own life.
Yes.
In that like his own life is a series of weird zags that like he couldn't have predicted. And yet that give voice to the contours of, and just the specific contours that make his life his own. Right. And when he looks back on it, he would in some ways be like, yeah, that's what was my life. That's what was important to my life, that it zagged in this weird way. We often all do that. And like, we sometimes wish it would have been a different way, but we're also like, but that was the way it was for me. So that's my story, and that's important to me. I just think like very few movies have like a central, imagery motif metaphor thing that is that potent. And to see it in this comedy that bombed at the box office is like kind of
and
an
bombed is like
thing.
a nice word for it. Yeah, it was a disaster, which is unbelievable. Though I would say, I told you guys before we started, I was part of the crowd yelling that it was a disaster when I first saw it when I was 11. But I do almost entirely blame that on being 11 years old and having no idea this was what life was like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also like, oh my God, it's big. Where's the fun part? Where does he eat the little corn? Where does he where does he where does he jump on the trampoline? Where's the piano steps? Where's Robert Law's?
Although I mean, I feel like the putt thing is like is just hammock or slubber is just like it's like FAO Schwartz for grown-ups, right?
True.
But
okay, but they're also, I mean, what did you think at 11 when they do the fishing scene? Because that scene,
I loved it. That was
when the shark shows up.
Finally, some movie.
I mean, when the shark shows up, I did lose my mind. I was like, that is so in some way out
like
of
we
place.
should talk just about the shark so we can just get it out of your system. What did you love? What did it for you about the shark?
Did you like that it's a hammerhead?
I love that it was a hammerhead.
It's got to be a hammerhead.
And I love that the shark is also like screaming, and they're both screaming at each other. Shark's like, ah!
The shark is also surprised.
Yeah, so good. I also like that this movie has very cartoony vibes, but like that is the most cartoony element of the movie.
Yeah, it's a whole sequence. There's no dialogue because the soundtrack is over the top, right?
Yeah.
And so like it's just like Joe is not catching anything, getting frustrated, not catching. I thought he was gonna get like a giant tire.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Yeah,
and also that scene, I love scenes like this that really serve no narrative or plot or motivating purpose. Like they're just fun. And, and like, that's the kind of scene that a producer is. I love scenes basically like this. When a producer sees it, they're like, we don't need to spend $25,000 on this scene. And Shanley's like, no, we're fucking doing this scene. The shark's got to come up and scream, get the prosthetic shark in there.
I need a shark puppet.
And
if only I had a producer that also made a famous shark movie.
Well, that's true. yeah. Spielberg was like, all right, I
got some version of that.
But yeah, that's the thing. Is like I love weird stuff like that. That like again, it's like a zag. It just adds some.
It is.
It adds some character to it, but it doesn't really do anything.
Yeah,
and I like that.
And I love moments like that in movies too. Those. Yes, but I also know. That there are people that absolutely hate that moment exists in this movie. So
wait, really?
No, I mean, just because
again,
I do get
what
that.
do they want from cinema?
Well, yes. What are you looking for from cinema, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's like, okay, we're willing to cut. It's like, I don't know if this reference will mean anything to you guys, but it's the camel and Ishtar. It's like, okay, we get it. Like but you can't push it this far. Like,
yeah,
you're operating barely in the boundaries of reality, and we like that, and we like the fableness and all that kind of stuff. But this like ridiculous looking shark, and they both scream at each other. It's like that breaks some, I don't know, fourth wall that you want to exist. I don't know.
See.
I don't have the problem with this. I can't explain that side of the argument as well. I just know some people are like, no, come on, this is silly, and
it's too silly.
Yeah, it's too silly.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what I should go with. It's
Yeah,
too
I
silly.
get that.
But it like embraces the philosophy of the movie. Though.
Yeah,
Like it's a stop and smell the flowers moment,
Yeah.
you know? And like for us as film viewers too, like we're just like, you know what's fun about cinema? Like a good like montage or, you know, having like a really nice needle drop and like something really goofy, just like a fun like visual.
Yeah.
That's why we're here.
To me, I think, and this is something that has been this is an idea that's been embraced by like quote unquote film Twitter recently in the last 5 or 10 years, which is basically like, you know, fuck plot, right? Like let's move, like, no, who cares, right? And I think like I'm glad that has happened, because I really do think like there's a lot of, I think I could see why somebody is just like, yeah, but it doesn't, this scene is both silly and it doesn't it doesn't, you know, service the plot in any way. But like, that's kind of what makes it great. And it adds character. And there's no reason why everything in a movie needs to be focused on telling a story. Like, story is one dimension of a film, but it's not the only one. And there's just so much more to a film than story. And some of it is texture and mood and the atmosphere and the, you know, and the character and all that. And, you know, all that stuff is connected to story in some ways. It can service the story or not, but it's its own thing and can be evaluated on its own. And I think when people embrace that, then a scene like this, you're just like, yeah, this makes perfect sense. Like, it's just, it fits the tone of this silly movie, and it kind of, you know, enlivens and underscores some of the themes.
Tom Hanks was really known for physical comedy at that point too. I mean, that's a lot of people don't think of Tom Hanks physical comedian now, but that was the vibe back then. I mean, you could just look at the movies he made in the 80s and be like, oh, okay, that makes a little bit more sense that he was.
That's true.
Yeah, that's a good point. He's like a slightly toned down Jim Carrey at that point almost.
Yeah.
Is that right? Does that scene come right on the heels too of the Soul Sick monologue?
Yeah, there's that.
Jess?
I don't know if that's true. You guys have seen it more recently than me, so
it's right around when they have the dinner on the boat, and
I think they have the dinner on the boat, and then he's like night night, and he's in his little blanket, and she tells him that she's soul sick.
I think so, yeah.
And then I feel like it's like a hard cut to like, let's have some fun, you know.
And
they're
then
both
and
healing.
then the ship is going to go down.
The ship is going to go down, so we might as well. But you know, they're both
he seems
healing.
so much happier on the luggage raft than he does on the ship. So there's also that. As you strip,
that's true.
As you strip more and more things, I mean, that's when he's doing the dancing, you know.
Yep.
And also just a shout out to Shanley again. He wrote all the lyrics to all the songs that are not real songs, you know. So he obviously didn't write 16 Tons, but like the cowboy song, he wrote that. Marooned Without You, which is not, the lyrics aren't used until the very end of the film, but it's that constant theme that instrumentally runs throughout the whole film. But it's a beautiful little, you know, piece of poetry that he throws in there too that most people probably don't dive deep into enough to care about. But he really was, I mean, not to, you know, move everything into an auteur theory discussion, but yes, this was all him. Like, this was his soul up on the screen. I do think that you really, I was thinking this about 45 minutes ago, so I'm not sure of the context of what we were talking about. But one thing that I really believe deeply about experiencing this film is that you do have, I mean, whatever attitudes you see on film Twitter and everywhere else, it's not really conducive to experiencing this movie, because you have to be open. You have to say, I'm going to accept wherever this movie takes me. I'm not going to kind of put the frames that I want to put on it. I do think Shanley helps you out a lot, which we haven't talked about, by literally starting the film with a big placard that says, once upon a time, there was a guy named Joe. And I was thinking about what you said earlier about how stories, and you didn't say fables, but fables, fairy tales, whatever, they exist as conduits to help the medicine go down, right? Like, there's a lot of really awful stuff that happens in fairy tales, but you accept it because it's a fairy tale, so it feels a little bit out of remove. So there is that slight kind of this isn't all true, but it is kind of true. And then that allows whimsy to come into it, but it also allows some darkness. I'd never say there's anything actually scary in the movie other than the fact that we're all going to die, which is pretty rough. But man, it helps that medicine go down too.
Yeah, the tone of the film is so light, and that allows us to process these complicated and troubling inevitabilities of our own life. Okay, I'm not gonna say. I was gonna bring in Kierkegaard, but I do think,
how about we have like a 2 philosopher max?
No, that's it. We're maxed out. But
we got
so they
Kant
end up
and
at
Heidegger, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they end up at Waponi Woo.
Yes.
The island, and
famous philosopher.
Do you want to? I mean, should we? I mean, we can lampshade our way around like how much we might be mildly offended by what happens in terms of the representation.
Oh, beyond mild. Yeah, but pretty offensive.
I do think that the film, first of all, it's clearly a made up island. So we're not like lampooning an actual culture. But the other thing is that we learn, right? The movie itself tells us that this island is populated by in part Romans with a crew of Jews and Druids. And their culture is a mixture of Polynesian, Celtic, Hebrew, and Latin. So I was just thinking,
and they love their orange soda,
yeah, and who love orange soda, and I was thinking like, okay, so you basically like telegraphed that you're gonna like have a bunch of like Jews and
you're gonna have Nathan Lane in a bunch of feathers and like and
I forgot it was Nathan Lane
and cans.
Yeah, and Abe Vigoda and stuff. Yeah, and like and to some extent, I'm like, yeah, well, you know what? If that's the world we live in this, because this is clearly not like reality.
Yeah,
I'm like, all right, that's fine. That's this world, and I don't really begrudge that dimension of the movie. Now, if the movie was like, oh yeah, and then they went to Thailand, and then it was like this, I'd be like, holy shit, that's horrible. But that's not where they go. Good. They go to a place which doesn't exist.
I feel like there's some effort to just like keep the comedy as focused on like there's the scene of Joe getting like whacked in the face with a bunch of fish and stuff, and like while Patricia's getting like a mani-pedi.
Yeah.
And I feel like they're trying to be like we're still joking, we're bashing on Joe here, there's an attempt to not lampoon.
But I have a question for you guys as people that just saw the movie this week for the first time. Because this is not something that ever comes up in my viewings since I was 11, because I knew what happened. But did you guys think he was going to jump into the volcano? Is there any tension there? I mean, I know what happened, so I don't think about that anymore. But
I think there definitely was some tension.
Mm-hmm.
The question was,
how are they going to get out of this?
How are they going to resolve this?
Yeah,
because I thought maybe he was just going to jump in and die, and but I also thought potentially he was going to walk away. But then I was like, but he has
that
a
defeats the
brain
whole
tumor,
purpose.
Yeah, yeah. So what they did was quite brilliant. I did not see it coming.
No, we got like a big laugh when they got blown out of the volcano. But no, I did not know what was going to happen. Yeah. And I sort of like surrendered myself to not knowing what was going on with this movie in the first act.
Right.
Because here's all I knew about Joe versus the Volcano, the cover. I had seen it at Blockbuster. I knew it was a blonde Meg Ryan holding on to Tom Hanks. And I was like, oh, it's one of those.
Right.
And I never watched it, and I never no idea. And you told me like we're watching Joe the Volcano, and I was like, great. And you see Meg Ryan, and she has dark hair, and she's Dee Dee, and then I kept thinking in the New York scene when he's drinking his martini with Blue Moon, this is when he calls Dee Dee. She goes on her adventure with him. I know because she's in this movie.
Oh, you didn't know she was in it 3 times?
No, I had no idea. So I was like,
amazing.
He's gonna call her. She's gonna dye her hair blonde, and they're gonna go on this adventure. And then they just do hard cut to the plane flying, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, Dee Dee's
okay,
gone.
I don't know
No
what
more
this
Dee Dee.
movie's doing.
Yeah.
And I was like, I have no idea.
that Roger Ebert hit on in his review, and everyone else was trashing it, which I think was very prescient, 30 years ago or whatever it was. 33 years ago. But he said, and this is someone who's seen, at this point, he'd been a critic for 20 years, so he'd seen probably 2,000 to 3,000 movies at that point. He's like, I have never seen a movie. I realize that watching movies, I have not seen a movie where I didn't know where it was going to go. I mean, you can read his review. He says it better than that. But he just like, I was constantly not sure what was going to happen in this movie. And that's such a gift to somebody who watches movies all day and is so used to all the beats and all the patterns and you can see it coming from a mile away. I don't think there's a lot you can see coming from even a few scenes away in this movie. So for me, that's the magic. For a lot of people, they just are like, I don't want anything to do with whatever this thing is doing because it's not hitting the beats I needed to hit.
Right. No, it's so fun. I'm good at guessing the ending movies. I just did that on a horror movie the other day.
Right. You did it on prom night.
Prom night.
Yeah, we were watching prom night for the first time and Laura was like, it's the brother. And I was like, really? All right.
Sorry, spoiler for prom night.
The movie is like from whatever, 1982 or something.
And if you get 2 hours into the Joe versus Volcano podcast, you might get prom night spoiled for you.
Chad,
put it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's in the show notes. Chad, do you have final concluding thoughts on Joe versus Volcano? Are there another way to think of it is like, are there other sort of films like this that are important to you in this way?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of my identity as a younger person, so like in my early 20s, I was getting my film degree. I was working at thankfully, it still exists. One of the few video stores that still exists in the world, Scarecrow Video here in Seattle. I always mention them any chance I get. But basically, everyone who worked there had a film degree. So I was like working on my film degree. I was like low man on the totem pole. But it was just one of those places that sound like they don't really exist or only exist in like a Quentin Tarantino story or whatever, where people just came in and we just talked about movies. And that was like my job and I got paid for it. And I still can't believe I got to do that. I wish that was still part of the culture. I know it's not anymore. A lot of it's online. I think you lose a lot of that stuff when it's not in person that you're having these discussions. But we just talked about movies all the time. And I should admit right now, I don't remember what the question you asked me was. What am I answering here?
This is great. My question, this is because, I was interested in like, whether there were other films similar to Joe the Volcano that had.
So that's what I'm drawn to. That was where I was going with all that. Thank you. Is that I'm always really drawn to movies that are doing stuff that I'm not used to seeing. I'm usually a pretty vocal proponent or champion of underdog type movies. I'm literally wearing a shirt underneath here for Kenneth Lonergan's Margaret, which is one of my other favorite movies. Which there is a long and fascinating story there and plenty of existential and philosophical stuff that you guys would have a field day with. But it's also 3.5 hours long and went through like 6 years before it could get released. So I just love movies like that where filmmakers are allowed to make the movie that they want. So it's not going into whatever blank check used to be, but it's that they're allowed to put some vision of what it means to them to be human on the screen. When people bash that for whatever reason, that just gets me even more into it. So like, I know you guys, I listened to enough of the episodes to know that you guys, or at least Justin is a big proponent of Tenet, right? So I watched Tenet.
Oh yeah, we're both Tenet heads.
Okay, it's both Tenet. Okay. So I couldn't even make it through the first time I tried to watch that, right? So, and then, but there's more. That's not where the story ends. Then I started hearing that people hated it. And some people loved it. And that's for whatever reason. And I would have to psychoanalyze myself for a long time to get there. But there's something about that I love where someone's pure artistic vision's put up on the screen and there's stuff to figure out. But not with Christopher Nolan. He does make it complicated. Where I'm still not sure what happened in Tenet. And, you guys had Brendan Hodges on the show recently, and he wrote for Bright Wall Dark Room about Tenet, and editing his essay and going through it all convinced me to watch it again. And I was like, oh, there is a lot that I actually do like about what this movie's doing, but I had to get there. And I hated Joe versus Volcano, and eventually I loved it. Right. So it's something about that I love that's present with Joe versus the Volcano, but that's not why I got into it. I mean, I thought someone was doing a bit on me at the video store when they said Joe versus the Volcano is amazing. You got to watch it. And I always mention him because he loves when I do. So his name's Ed Ward, and we worked together at a video store 25 years ago now. And he's like, "You got to watch this," and I was like, "Yeah, okay, whatever." I saw this when I was a kid. It's terrible. He's like, "No, we had a video screen. We had a monitor in the store that we put video, so we got to pick what movies we wanted to have on." So he's like, he would put it on, and I kept hearing more and more of it. And it's like, okay, what's going on here? This is not what I remember. So then I started watching it, and then I started obsessively watching it, and then I started, saying, okay, this is going to be my new thing. And I've just been on that mission for 20 years to get people to take it the way that you guys just took it from an email saying, hey, this is the movie I want to talk about. So thank you guys for being so accepting of it, and also take it. There's one level when you can have this big, long philosophical discussion about it. There's another one where you can just put it on and watch a 90-minute movie that's really going to just do a lot of fun stuff for you, even if you don't think about any other stuff. And I didn't think
for the record, that's how I feel about Tenet. You don't have to understand it.
Yeah, well, okay.
I mean, Tenet's a little lighter hearted than Joe versus the Volcano.
I mean, it's just a ripping good time.
Yeah. No.
Just hot guys doing cool stuff.
Chet, both points well taken. But you're totally right that like Joe versus the Volcano, it's just super fun. Yes, I'm pathologically have to do this with every movie I watch.
It's got to break out the content for every movie.
But this, it was super fun to watch. The other thing that you said that I think I totally agree with, I am totally behind, is my favorite movies, the movies that like resonate with me are movies where the director gets to do whatever they want and they just take a huge swing.
Yep.
And it's the kind of movie that's deeply divisive, and that I love. The
1-star and 5-star split on a letterbox.
Bimodal ratings. That's what I want.
Justin loves that.
I really do. It's weird. Like a movie that everyone was like, yeah, it was fun, 3 stars. That to me is like, I'm like, fine. That's fine. Like I can, it's fine, whatever. And some of those movies I do enjoy, but really it's the huge swing movies that I feel like, even if I hate them, I'm so intrigued by them. Like even if I'm like, man, this really is painful to watch, it's still like Battlefield Earth is a nice example of this. Or, Troll 2, the movies that we had our
Dear Evan Hansen. You love Dear Evan Hansen.
I like Dear Evan Hansen. Yeah.
I couldn't do it. I was curled up in a ball.
Well, that's the thing is
they
movies
put a
that are
75-year-old man in the lead role.
I love it. Yeah. And not only that, when he's singing those scenes where he's like, it's like so a close up on his face. So and you can see his 5 o'clock shadow.
It's also just like, you're like, that's why we watch musicals like at a great distance.
Yeah, with
watching people sing like this is very uncomfortable.
It's so weird. Anyway,
but yeah, so like I saw Magnolia like 4 times in the theater at the same time in 1999 too. So I mean I love the big swings. I love go for it. Have a musical scene, have frogs rain from the sky. I'm there.
Hell yeah.
So,
thanks so much, Chad, for being here.
Absolutely, guys. This was great.
Wonderful. So everyone should read Bright Wall Dark Room, listen to the Bright Wall Dark Room podcast. Give us this, like the social stuff so that everyone can go and find their way there.
Yeah. I mean, the social stuff's in flux because, it's hard when the platform that you use to kind of build everything that got you some amount of recognition in the world is also now just like the worst thing on earth, and you just don't know how to get out of that trap. So we are on
it's letter
Twitter,
moniker,
which I will not call by its letter, whatever it is now. It's letter moniker at BWDR. That's still probably the most common place to find us, though we are looking for alternatives every day. We're on Blue Sky. I don't know how to say it's too long to know what it is, but BWDR is in there. If you search Bright Wall Dark Room on Blue Sky, you'll find us pretty quick. We got off Facebook a couple years ago because of the problems with Facebook. I guess we do a lot. Thankfully, we've been around long enough at this point where we don't need to rely on social media. You guys have Patreon too, right? What happened a few years ago, we'd have been really screwed. So, basically, read the site. We do have a Patreon. Yeah, that used to be a much bigger thing too. I don't know if you guys have seen their new logo.
Okay,
but if you're looking for some laughs, you should look at what their new logo is because it's really like
show notes.
I'm not even going to spoil it. So, The main way to support us in any way is honestly to read the site, and then just subscribe. Like, it used to be a hard sell to say, hey, it's $5 a month, but like most people are paying like $8 a month for like 20 Substacks. So I feel like we put out more content than that. We certainly do it, with a lot of love. There's a lot of humanness to it. That's always been central to that. And if we ever lose that, I think that I'll shut it down. So,
yeah. Read Bright Wall Dark Room, great stuff, and in particular, read the Brendan Hodges essay, because everyone who listens to this show loves Tenet. So you should read the Brendan Hodges Tenet essay on Bright Wall Dark Room.
That's a great essay, yeah.
And then listen to the Bright Wall Dark Room podcast, which is great. And you'll hear who are your co-hosts, by the way?
It's just one. It's Veronica Fitzpatrick, who is 100 times smarter than me. So I love listening to her. I basically do the show each month so that I can listen to what she thinks about movies. So she's great. She's a postdoctoral. I don't know all the nomenclature around this stuff, but at Brown University, teaches a lot of film classes. If somehow you end up going to Brown, it's a wonderful. Her syllabi sound fantastic every single time she talks about them. And she's also a fantastic writer too. So we host that together. A little bit of serendipity as I looked on your guys' website today. Whoever you're having on to record your next episode with is also who we're having on.
That's right. I'm going to shout that out right now. Mr. Blake.
Mr. Blake Howard.
What are you recording with Blake? Can you say it?
Yes. We are narrowing it down. We do a thing every it just sounds funny to say out loud. Every Christmas we do Cruisemas, which we pick a Tom Cruise movie. So we did Eyes Wide Shut a couple of years ago. We did Vanilla Sky. So we're not going after like the main stuff. So it is on Blake's plate currently. We will see how this resolves. It can be a cliffhanger for you guys. We're not sure. He will be talking about a Tom Cruise movie on our show. But a bona fide classic on your show. So.
Yes. So, okay. So I now you just set me up to do the socials for us. So we are at CowsPod on Twitter. You can find us on the web at cowspod.com. And by the way, we have a Gmail account. It's had this for a while. I'm going to advertise it now in case people want to write to us. Reach out to us at cowspod@gmail.com. In 2 weeks, we'll be discussing with Blake, the aforementioned Blake Howard of One Heat Minute Productions. We'll be discussing one of Blake's, maybe Blake's favorite, if not, I think it's his favorite film.
It's not Heat?
No.
Is it? I don't know.
I think it's LA Confidential.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm so excited.
We'll get confirmation of this when we record with Blake in a few days. And,
okay.
But yeah, I think LA Confidential is his favorite film.
If you ever spend any time talking with him in real time, I mean, it's just.
I know I've never met Blake in real life.
There are, he's a human. I don't even know what the word is. He's just, there's no one I've ever met who came away from a conversation with him saying like, well, that sucked.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, that seems right.
Have we just done
we've done Ali with Blake. So
because you already talked about
right, because we did Collateral with his co-host.
With Katie.
Yeah, with Katie,
Oh yeah, Katie. We had Katie on a few episodes ago too. So we're swimming in similar seas.
It's great. This is the world. Yeah. This is the world of online film discussion. And we're just happy to be
it's a very nice
small
one.
Part of this massive
you guys are great. So. Yeah. I mean, I was listening to the show before, but definitely ramped it up in the last few weeks. And it's great. You guys do a fantastic show.
Thank you so much, Chad. And
honored to be here.
Thank you so very much for being here. And thanks to the listeners. So join us in 2 weeks for LA Confidential. We'll see you then.